Chapter 16. Methods of Delivery. The crown, the consummation, of the discourse is its delivery. Toward it all preparation looks, for it the audience waits, by it the speaker is judged. All the forces of the orator's life converge in his oratory. The logical acuteness with which he marshals the facts around his theme, the rhetorical facility with which he orders his language, the control to which he has attained in the use of his body as a single organ of expression, whatever richness of acquisition and experience are his, these all are now incidents. The fact is the sending of his message home to his hearers. The hour of delivery is the supreme, inevitable hour for the orator. It is this fact that makes lack of adequate preparation such an impertinence. And it is this that sends such thrills of indescribable joy through the orator's whole being when he has achieved a success. It is like the mother forgetting her pangs for the joy of bringing a son into the world. JBE, How to Attract and Hold an Audience. There are 4 fundamental methods of delivering an address. All others are modifications of one or more of these: reading from manuscript, committing the written speech and speaking from memory, speaking from notes, and extemporaneous speech. It is impossible to say which form of delivery is best for all speakers in all circumstances. In deciding for yourself you should consider the occasion, the nature of the audience, the character of your subject, and your own limitations of time and ability. However, it is worthwhile warning you not to be lenient in self-exaction. Say to yourself courageously, what others can do, I can attempt. A bold spirit conquers where others flinch, and a trying task challenges pluck. Reading from manuscript. This method really deserves short shrift in a book on public speaking, for, delude yourself as you may, public reading is not public speaking. Yet there are so many who grasp this broken reed for support that we must here discuss the reed speech, apologetic misnomer as it is. Certainly there are occasions, among them, the opening of Congress, the presentation of a sore question before a deliberative body, or a historical commemoration, when it may seem not alone to the orator, but to all those interested that the chief thing is to express certain thoughts in precise language, in language that must not be either misunderstood or misquoted. At such times oratory is unhappily elbowed to a back bench, the manuscript is solemnly withdrawn from the capacious inner pocket of the new frock coat, and everyone settles himself resignedly, with only a feeble flicker of hope that the so-called speech may not be as long as it is thick. The words may be golden, but the hearers' eyes are prone to be leaden, and in about 1 instance out of 100 does the perpetrator really deliver an impressive address. His excuse is his apology. He is not to be blamed, as a rule, for someone decreed that it would be dangerous to cut loose from manuscript moorings and take his audience with him on a really delightful sail. One great trouble on such great occasions is that the essayist, for such he is, has been chosen not because of his speaking ability but because his grandfather fought in a certain battle, or his constituents sent him to Congress, or his gifts in some line of endeavor other than speaking have distinguished him. As well choose a surgeon from his ability to play golf. To be sure, it always interests an audience to see a great man. Because of his eminence they are likely to listen to his words with respect, perhaps with interest, even when drawn from a manuscript. But how much more effective such a deliverance would be if the papers were cast aside. Nowhere is the reed address so common as in the pulpit, that in these days least of all can afford to invite a handicap. Doubtless many clergymen prefer finish to fervor. Let them choose. They are rarely men who sway the masses to acceptance of their message. What they gain in precision and elegance of language they lose in force. There are just 4 motives that can move a man to read his address or sermon. 1. Laziness is the commonest. Enough said. Even heaven cannot make a lazy man efficient. 2. A memory so defective that he really cannot speak without reading. Alas, he is not speaking when he is reading, so his dilemma is painful, and not to himself alone. But no man has a right to assume that his memory is utterly bad until he has buckled down to memory culture, and failed. A weak memory is oftener an excuse than a reason. 3. A genuine lack of time to do more than write the speech. There are such instances, but they do not occur every week. The disposition of your time allows more flexibility than you realize. Motive 3 too often harnesses up with motive 1. 4. A conviction that the speech is too important to risk forsaking the manuscript. But, if it is vital that every word should be so precise, the style so polished, and the thoughts so logical, that the preacher must write the sermon entire, is not the message important enough to warrant extra effort in perfecting its delivery? It is an insult to a congregation and disrespectful to Almighty God to put the phrasing of a message above the message itself. To reach the hearts of the hearers, the sermon must be delivered. It is only half delivered when the speaker cannot utter it with original fire and force, when he merely repeats words that were conceived hours or weeks before and hence are like champagne that has lost its fizz. The reading preacher's eyes are tied down to his manuscript. He cannot give the audience the benefit of his expression. How long would a play fill a theater if the actors held their cue books in hand and read their parts? Imagine Patrick Henry reading his famous speech, Peter the Hermit, manuscript in hand, exhorting the Crusaders, Napoleon, constantly looking at his papers, addressing the army at the pyramids, or Jesus reading the Sermon on the Mount. These speakers were so full of their subjects, their general preparation had been so richly adequate, that there was no necessity for a manuscript either to refer to or to serve as an outward and visible sign of their preparedness. No event was ever so dignified that it required an artificial attempt at speech-making. Call an essay by its right name, but never call it a speech. Perhaps the most dignified of events is a supplication to the Creator. If you ever listened to the reading of an original prayer, you must have felt its superficiality. Regardless of what the theories may be about manuscript delivery, the fact remains that it does not work out with efficiency. Avoid it whenever at all possible. Committing the written speech and speaking from memory, this method has certain points in its favor. If you have time and leisure, it is possible to polish and rewrite your ideas until they are expressed in clear, concise terms. Pope sometimes spent a whole day in perfecting one couplet. Gibbon consumed 20 years gathering material for and rewriting the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Although you cannot devote such painstaking preparation to a speech, you should take time to eliminate useless words, crowd whole paragraphs into a sentence and choose proper illustrations. Good speeches, like plays, are not written, they are rewritten. The National Cash Register Company follows this plan with their most efficient selling organization. They require their salesmen to memorize verbatim a selling talk. They maintain that there is one best way of putting their selling arguments, and they insist that each salesman use this ideal way rather than employ any haphazard phrases that may come into his mind at the moment. The method of writing and committing has been adopted by many noted speakers. Julius Caesar, Robert Ingersoll, and, on some occasions, Wendell Phillips, were distinguished examples. The wonderful effects achieved by famous actors were, of course, accomplished through the delivery of memorized lines. The inexperienced speaker must be warned before attempting this method of delivery that it is difficult and trying. It requires much skill to make it efficient. The memorized lines of the young speaker will usually sound like memorized words, and repel. If you want to hear an example, listen to a department store demonstrator repeat her memorized lingo about the newest furniture polish or breakfast food. It requires training to make a memorized speech sound fresh and spontaneous, and, unless you have a fine native memory, in each instance the finished product necessitates much labor. Should you forget a part of your speech or miss a few words, you are liable to be so confused that, like Mark Twain's guide in Rome, you will be compelled to repeat your lines from the beginning. On the other hand, you may be so taken up with trying to recall your written words that you will not abandon yourself to the spirit of your address, and so fail to deliver it with that spontaneity which is so vital to forceful delivery. But do not let these difficulties frighten you. If committing seems best to you, give it a faithful trial. Do not be deterred by its pitfalls, but by resolute practice avoid them. One of the best ways to rise superior to these difficulties is to do as Dr. Wallace Radcliffe often does, commit without writing the speech, making practically all the preparation mentally, without putting pen to paper, a laborious but effective way of cultivating both mind and memory. You will find it excellent practice, both for memory and delivery, to commit the specimen speeches found in this volume and declaim them, with all attention to the principles we have put before you. William Ellery Channing, himself a distinguished speaker, years ago had this to say of practice in declamation: "Is there not an amusement, having an affinity with the drama, which might be usefully introduced among us? I mean, recitation. A work of genius, recited by a man of fine taste, enthusiasm, and powers of elocution, is a very pure and high gratification. Were this art cultivated and encouraged, great numbers, now insensible to the most beautiful compositions, might be waked up to their excellence and power." Speaking from notes, the third, and the most popular method of delivery, is probably also the best one for the beginner. Speaking from notes is not ideal delivery, but we learn to swim in shallow water before going out beyond the ropes. Make a definite plan for your discourse. For a fuller discussion, see Chapter 18, and set down the points somewhat in the fashion of a lawyer's brief, or a preacher's outline. Here is a sample of very simple notes. Attention I. Introduction. Attention indispensable to the performance of any great work. Anecdote. 2. Defined and illustrated. 1. From common observation. 2. From the lives of great men, Carlyle, Robert E. Lee. 3. Its relation to other mental powers. 1. Reason. 2. Imagination. 3. Memory. 4. Will. Anecdote. 4. Attention may be cultivated. 1. Involuntary attention. 2. Voluntary attention. Examples. V. Conclusion. The consequences of inattention and of attention. Few briefs would be so precise as this one, for with experience a speaker learns to use little tricks to attract his eye. He may underscore a catchword heavily, draw a red circle around a pivotal idea, enclose the keyword of an anecdote in a wavy-lined box, and so on indefinitely. These points are worth remembering, for nothing so eludes the swift glancing eye of the speaker as the sameness of typewriting, or even a regular pen script. So unintentional a thing as a blot on the page may help you to remember a big point in your brief, perhaps by association of ideas. An inexperienced speaker would probably require fuller notes than the specimen given. Yet that way lies danger, for the complete manuscript is but a short remove from the copious outline. Use as few notes as possible. They may be necessary for the time being, but do not fail to look upon them as a necessary evil, and even when you lay them before you, refer to them only when compelled to do so. Make your notes as full as you please in preparation, but by all means condense them for platform use. Extemporaneous speech. Surely this is the ideal method of delivery. It is far and away the most popular with the audience, and the favorite method of the most efficient speakers. Extemporaneous speech has sometimes been made to mean unprepared speech, and indeed it is too often precisely that, but in no such sense do we recommend it strongly to speakers old and young. On the contrary, to speak well without notes requires all the preparation which we discussed so fully in the chapter on fluency, while yet relying upon the inspiration of the hour for some of your thoughts and much of your language. You had better remember, however, that the most effective inspiration of the hour is the inspiration you yourself bring to it, bottled up in your spirit and ready to infuse itself into the audience. If you extemporize, you can get much closer to your audience. In a sense, they appreciate the task you have before you and send out their sympathy. Extemporize, and you will not have to stop and fumble around amidst your notes. You can keep your eye afire with your message and hold your audience with your very glance. You yourself will feel their response as you read the effects of your warm, spontaneous words, written on their countenances. Sentences written out in the study are liable to be dead and cold when resurrected before the audience. When you create as you speak, you conserve all the native fire of your thought. You can enlarge on one point or omit another, just as the occasion or the mood of the audience may demand. It is not possible for every speaker to use this, the most difficult of all methods of delivery, and least of all can it be used successfully without much practice, but it is the ideal towards which all should strive. One danger in this method is that you may be led aside from your subject into bypaths. To avoid this peril, firmly stick to your mental outline. Practice speaking from a memorized brief until you gain control. Join a debating society, talk, and always extemporize. You may make a fool of yourself once or twice, but is that too great a price to pay for success? Notes, like crutches, are only a sign of weakness. Remember that the power of your speech depends to some extent upon the view your audience holds of you. General Grant's words as president were more powerful than his words as a Missouri farmer. If you would appear in the light of an authority, be one. Make notes on your brain instead of on paper. Joint methods of delivery. A modification of the second method has been adopted by many great speakers, particularly lecturers who are compelled to speak on a wide variety of subjects day after day. Such speakers often commit their addresses to memory but keep their manuscripts in flexible book form before them, turning several pages at a time. They feel safer for having a sheet anchor to windward, but it is an anchor, nevertheless, and hinders rapid, free sailing, though it drag never so lightly. Other speakers throw out a still lighter anchor by keeping before them a rather full outline of their written and committed speech. Others again write and commit a few important parts of the address, the introduction, the conclusion, some vital argument, some pat illustration, and depend on the hour for the language of the rest. This method is well adapted to speaking either with or without notes. Some speakers read from manuscript the most important parts of their speeches and utter the rest extemporaneously. Thus, what we have called joint methods of delivery are open to much personal variation. You must decide for yourself which is best for you, for the occasion, for your subject, for your audience, for these four factors all have their individual claims. Whatever form you choose, do not be so weakly indifferent as to prefer the easy way. Choose the best way, whatever it cost you in time and effort. And of this be assured, only the practiced speaker can hope to gain both conciseness of argument and conviction in manner, polish of language and power in delivery, finish of style and fire in utterance. Questions and exercises. 1. Which in your judgment is the most suitable of delivery for you? Why? 2. What objections can you offer to a. Memorizing the entire speech, b. Reading from manuscript, c. Using notes, d. Speaking from memorized outline or notes, e. Any of the joint methods? 3. What is there to commend in delivering a speech in any of the foregoing methods? 4. Can you suggest any combination of methods that you have found efficacious? 5. What methods, according to your observation, do most successful speakers use? 6. Select some topic from the list on page 123, narrow the theme so as to make it specific, see page 122, and deliver a short address, utilizing the four methods mentioned, in 4 different deliveries of the speech. 7. Select one of the joint methods and apply it to the delivery of the same address. 8. Which method do you prefer, and why? 9. From the list of subjects in the appendix select a theme and deliver a 5-minute address without notes, but make careful preparation without putting your thoughts on paper. Note, it is earnestly hoped that instructors will not pass this stage of the work without requiring of their students much practice in the delivery of original speeches, in the manner that seems, after some experiment, to be best suited to the students' gifts. Students who are studying alone should be equally exacting in demand upon themselves. One point is most important: it is easy to learn to read a speech, therefore it is much more urgent that the pupil should have much practice in speaking from notes and speaking without notes. At this stage, pay more attention to manner than to matter. The succeeding chapters take up the composition of the address. Be particularly insistent upon frequent and thorough review of the principles of delivery discussed in the preceding chapters. Chapter 17. Thought and Reserve Power. Providence is always on the side of the last reserve. Napoleon Bonaparte. So mightiest powers by deepest calms are fed, and sleep, how oft, in things that gentlest be. Barry Cornwall, The Sea in Calm. What would happen if you should overdraw your bank account? As a rule, the check would be protested, but if you were on friendly terms with the bank, your check might be honored, and you would be called upon to make good the overdraft. Nature has no such favorites, therefore extends no credits. She is as relentless as a gasoline tank. When the gas is all used, the machine stops. It is as reckless for a speaker to risk going before an audience without having something in reserve as it is for the motorist to essay a long journey in the wilds without enough gasoline in sight. But in what does a speaker's reserve power consist? In a well-founded reliance on his general and particular grasp of his subject, in the quality of being alert and resourceful in thought, particularly in the ability to think while on his feet, and in that self-possession which makes one the captain of all his own forces, bodily and mental. The first of these elements, adequate preparation, and the last, self-reliance, were discussed fully in the chapters on self-confidence and fluency, so they will be touched only incidentally here. Besides, the next chapter will take up specific methods of preparation for public speaking. Therefore, the central theme of this chapter is the second of the elements of reserve power, thought. The mental storehouse, an empty mind, like an empty larder, may be a serious matter or not, all will depend on the available resources. If there is no food in the cupboard, the housewife does not nervously rattle the empty dishes, she telephones the grocer. If you have no ideas, do not rattle your empty airs and ahs, but get some ideas, and don't speak until you do get them. This, however, is not being what the old New England housekeeper used to call forehand. The real solution of the problem of what to do with an empty head is never to let it become empty. In the artesian wells of Dakota, the water rushes to the surface and leaps a score of feet above the ground. The secret of this exuberant flow is of course the great supply below, crowding to get out. What is the use of stopping to prime a mental pump when you can fill your life with the resources for an artesian well? It is not enough to have merely enough, you must have more than enough. Then the pressure of your mass of thought and feeling will maintain your flow of speech and give you the confidence and poise that denote reserve power. To be away from home with only the exact return fare leaves a great deal to circumstances. Reserve power is magnetic. It does not consist in giving the idea that you are holding something in reserve, but rather in the suggestion that the audience is getting the cream of your observation, reading, experience, feeling, thought. To have reserve power, therefore, you must have enough milk of material on hand to supply sufficient cream. But how shall we get the milk? There are two ways, the one is first-hand, from the cow, the other is second-hand, from the milkman. The seeing eye, some sage has said, for 1,000 men who can speak, there is only one who can think, for 1,000 men who can think, there is only one who can see. To see and to think is to get your milk from your own cow. When the one man in a million who can see comes along, we call him master. Old Mr. Holbrook, of Cranford, asked his guest what color ash buds were in March. She confessed she did not know, to which the old gentleman answered, "I knew you didn't." No more did I, an old fool that I am, till this young man comes and tells me. Black as ash buds in March. And I've lived all my life in the country. More shame for me not to know. Black, they are jet black, madam. This young man, referred to by Mr. Holbrook, was Tennyson. Henry Ward Beecher said, "I do not believe that I have ever met a man on the street that I did not get from him some element for a sermon. I never see anything in nature which does not work towards that for which I give the strength of my life. The material for my sermons is all the time following me and swarming up around me." Instead of saying only one man in a million can see, it would strike nearer the truth to say that none of us sees with perfect understanding more than a fraction of what passes before our eyes, yet this faculty of acute and accurate observation is so important that no man ambitious to lead can neglect it. The next time you are in a car, look at those who sit opposite you and see what you can discover of their habits, occupations, ideals, nationalities, environments, education, and so on. You may not see a great deal the first time, but practice will reveal astonishing results. Transmute every incident of your day into a subject for a speech or an illustration. Translate all that you see into terms of speech. When you can describe all that you have seen in definite words, you are seeing clearly. You are becoming the millionth man. De Maupassant's description of an author should also fit the public speaker. His eye is like a suction pump, absorbing everything, like a pickpocket's hand, always at work. Nothing escapes him. He is constantly collecting material, gathering up glances, gestures, intentions, everything that goes on in his presence, the slightest look, the least act, the merest trifle. De Maupassant was himself a millionth man, a master. Ruskin took a common rock crystal and saw hidden within its stolid heart lessons which have not yet ceased to move men's lives. Beecher stood for hours before the window of a jewelry store thinking out analogies between jewels and the souls of men. Gough saw in a single drop of water enough truth wherewith to quench the thirst of 5,000 souls. Thoreau sat so still in the shadowy woods that birds and insects came and opened up their secret lives to his eye. Emerson observed the soul of a man so long that at length he could say, "I cannot hear what you say, foreseeing what you are." Prayer for 3 years studied the life of his babe and so became an authority upon the child mind. Observation. Most men are blind. There are 1,000 times as many hidden truths and undiscovered facts about us today as have made discoverers famous, facts waiting for someone to pluck out the heart of their mystery. But so long as men go about the search with eyes that see not, so long will these hidden pearls lie in their shells. Not an orator but who could more effectively point and feather his shafts were he to search nature rather than libraries. Too few can see sermons in stones and books in the running brooks, because they are so used to seeing merely sermons in books and only stones in running brooks. Sir Philip Sidney had a saying, "Look in thy heart and write." Massillon explained his astute knowledge of the human heart by saying, "I learned it by studying myself." Byron says of John Locke that all his knowledge of the human understanding was derived from studying his own mind. Since multiform nature is all about us, originality ought not to be so rare. 8. The thinking mind. Thinking is doing mental arithmetic with facts. Add this fact to that and you reach a certain conclusion. Subtract this truth from another and you have a definite result. Multiply this fact by another and have a precise product. See how many times this occurrence happens in that space of time and you have reached a calculable dividend. In thought processes you perform every known problem of arithmetic and algebra. That is why mathematics are such excellent mental gymnastics. But by the same token, thinking is work. Thinking takes energy. Thinking requires time, and patience, and broad information, and clear-headedness. Beyond a miserable little surface scratching, few people really think at all, only 1 in 1,000, according to the pundit already quoted. So long as the present system of education prevails and children are taught through the ear rather than through the eye, so long as they are expected to remember thoughts of others rather than think for themselves, this proportion will continue. 1 man in 1,000,000 will be able to see, and 1 in 1,000 to think. But, however thoughtless a mind has been, there is promise of better things so soon as the mind detects its own lack of thought power. The first step is to stop regarding thought as the magic of the mind, to use Byron's expression, and see it as thought truly is, a weighing of ideas and a placing of them in relationships to each other. Ponder this definition and see if you have learned to think efficiently. Habitual thinking is just that, a habit. Habit comes of doing a thing repeatedly. The lower habits are acquired easily, the higher ones require deeper grooves if they are to persist. So we find that the thought habit comes only with resolute practice, yet no effort will yield richer dividends. Persist in practice, and whereas you have been able to think only an inch deep into a subject, you will soon find that you can penetrate it a foot. Perhaps this homely metaphor will suggest how to begin the practice of consecutive thinking, by which we mean welding a number of separate thought links into a chain that will hold. Take one link at a time, see that each naturally belongs with the ones you link to it, and remember that a single missing link means no chain. Thinking is the most fascinating and exhilarating of all mental exercises. Once realize that your opinion on a subject does not represent the choice you have made between what Dr. Cerebrum has written and Professor Cerebellum has said, but is the result of your own earnestly applied brain energy, and you will gain a confidence in your ability to speak on that subject that nothing will be able to shake. Your thought will have given you both power and reserve power. Someone has condensed the relation of thought to knowledge in these pungent, homely lines: "Don't give me the man who thinks he thinks, don't give me the man who thinks he knows, but give me the man who knows he thinks, and I have the man who knows he knows." Reading as a stimulus to thought. No matter how dry the cow, however, nor how poor our ability to milk, there is still the milkman. We can read what others have seen and felt and thought. Often, indeed, such records will kindle within us that pre-essential and vital spark, the desire to be a thinker. The following selection is taken from one of Dr. Newell Dwight Hillis's lectures, as given in A Man's Value to Society. Dr. Hillis is a most fluent speaker. He never refers to notes. He has reserve power. His mind is a veritable treasure house of facts and ideas. See how he draws from a knowledge of 15 different general or special subjects: geology, plant life, Palestine, chemistry, Eskimos, mythology, literature, the Nile, history, law, wit, evolution, religion, biography, and electricity. Surely, it needs no sage to discover that the secret of this man's reserve power is the old secret of our artesian well, whose abundance surges from unseen depths. The uses of books and reading. 9. Each Kingsley approaches a stone as a jeweler approaches a casket to unlock the hidden gems. Geeky causes the bit of hard coal to unroll the juicy bud, the thick odorous leaves, the pungent boughs, until the bit of carbon enlarges into the beauty of a tropic forest. That little book of Grant Allen's called How Plants Grow exhibits trees and shrubs as eating, drinking, and marrying. We see certain date groves in Palestine, and other date groves in the desert 100 miles away, and the pollen of the one carried upon the trade winds to the branches of the other. We see the tree with its strange system of waterworks, pumping the sap up through pipes and mains. We see the chemical laboratory in the branches mixing flavor for the orange in one bough, mixing the juices of the pineapple in another. We behold the tree as a mother making each infant acorn ready against the long winter, rolling it in swaths soft and warm as wool blankets, wrapping it around with garments impervious to the rain, and finally slipping the infant acorn into a sleeping bag, like those the Eskimos gave Dr. Kane. At length we come to feel that the Greeks were not far wrong in thinking each tree had a dryad in it, animating it, protecting it against destruction, dying when the tree withered. Some Faraday shows us that each drop of water is a sheath for electric forces sufficient to charge 800,000 Leyden jars, or drive an engine from Liverpool to London. Some Sir William Thomson tells us how hydrogen gas will chew up a large iron spike as a child's molars will chew off the end of a stick of candy. Thus each new book opens up some new and hitherto unexplored realm of nature. Thus books fulfill for us the legend of the wondrous glass that showed its owner all things distant and all things hidden. Through books our world becomes as a bud from the bower of God's beauty, the sun as a spark from the light of his wisdom, the sky as a bubble on the sea of his power. Therefore Mrs. Browning's words, "No child can be called fatherless who has God and his mother, no youth can be called friendless who has God and the companionship of good books." Books also advantage us in that they exhibit the unity of progress, the solidarity of the race, and the continuity of history. Authors lead us back along the pathway of law, of liberty, or religion, and set us down in front of the great man in whose brain the principle had its rise. As the discoverer leads us from the mouth of the Nile back to the headwaters of Nyanza, so books exhibit great ideas and institutions, as they move forward, ever widening and deepening, like some Nile feeding many civilizations. For all the reforms of today go back to some reform of yesterday. Man's art goes back to Athens and Thebes. Man's laws go back to Blackstone and Justinian. Man's reapers and plows go back to the savage scratching the ground with his forked stick, drawn by the wild bullock. The heroes of liberty march forward in a solid column. Lincoln grasps the hand of Washington. Washington received his weapons at the hands of Hampden and Cromwell. The great Puritans lock hands with Luther and Savonarola. The unbroken procession brings us at length to him whose Sermon on the Mount was the very charter of liberty. It puts us under a divine spell to perceive that we are all co-workers with the great men, and yet single threads in the warp and woof of civilization. And when books have related us to our own age, and related all the epochs to God, whose providence is the Gulf Stream of history, these teachers go on to stimulate us to new and greater achievements. Alone, man is an unlighted candle. The mind needs some book to kindle its faculties. Before Byron began to write, he used to give half an hour to reading some favorite passage. The thought of some great writer never failed to kindle Byron into a creative glow, even as a match lights the kindlings upon the grate. In these burning, luminous moods Byron's mind did its best work. The true book stimulates the mind as no wine can ever quicken the blood. It is reading that brings us to our best, and rouses each faculty to its most vigorous life. We recognize this as pure cream, and if it seems at first to have its secondary source in the friendly milkman, let us not forget that the theme is, the uses of books and reading. Dr. Hillis both sees and thinks. It is fashionable just now to decry the value of reading. We read, we are told, to avoid the necessity of thinking for ourselves. Books are for the mentally lazy. Though this is only a half-truth, the element of truth it contains is large enough to make us pause. Put yourself through a good old Presbyterian soul-searching self-examination, and if reading from thought laziness is one of your sins, confess it. No one can shrive you of it, but yourself. Do penance for it by using your own brains, for it is a transgression that dwarfs the growth of thought and destroys mental freedom. At first the penance will be trying, but at the last you will be glad in it. Reading should entertain, give information, or stimulate thought. Here, however, we are chiefly concerned with information and stimulation of thought. What shall I read for information? The ample page of knowledge, as Gray tells us, is rich with the spoils of time, and these are ours for the price of a theater ticket. You may command Socrates and Marcus Aurelius to sit beside you and discourse of their choicest, hear Lincoln at Gettysburg and Pericles at Athens, storm the Bastille with Hugo, and wander through paradise with Dante. You may explore darkest Africa with Stanley, penetrate the human heart with Shakespeare, chat with Carlyle about heroes, and delve with the Apostle Paul into the mysteries of faith. The general knowledge and the inspiring ideas that men have collected through ages of toil and experiment are yours for the asking. The sage of Chelsea was right, the true university of these days is a collection of books. To master a worthwhile book is to master much else besides. Few of us, however, make perfect conquest of a volume without first owning it physically. To read a borrowed book may be a joy, but to assign your own book a place of its own on your own shelves, be they few or many, to love the book and feel of its worn cover, to thumb it over slowly, page by page, to pencil its margins in agreement or in protest, to smile or thrill with its remembered pungencies, no mere book borrower could ever sense all that delight. The reader who possesses books in this double sense finds also that his books possess him, and the volumes which most firmly grip his life are likely to be those it has cost him some sacrifice to own. These lightly cumby titles, which Mr. Fatpurse selects, perhaps by proxy, can scarcely play the guide, philosopher and friend in crucial moments as do the books, long coveted, joyously attained, that are welcomed into the lives, and not merely the libraries, of us others who are at once poorer and richer. So it is scarcely too much to say that of all the many ways in which an owned, a mastered, book is like to a human friend, the truest ways are these: a friend is worth making sacrifices for, both to gain and to keep, and our loves go out most dearly to those into whose inmost lives we have sincerely entered. When you have not the advantage of the test of time by which to judge books, investigate as thoroughly as possible the authority of the books you read. Much that is printed and passes current is counterfeit. I read it in a book is to many a sufficient warranty of truth, but not to the thinker. What book, asks the careful mind. Who wrote it? What does he know about the subject and what right has he to speak on it? Who recognizes him as authority? With what other recognized authorities does he agree or disagree? Being caught trying to pass counterfeit money, even unintentionally, is an unpleasant situation. Beware lest you circulate spurious coin. Above all, seek reading that makes you use your own brains. Such reading must be alive with fresh points of view, packed with special knowledge, and deal with subjects of vital interest. Do not confine your reading to what you already know you will agree with. Opposition wakes one up. The other road may be the better, but you will never know it unless you give it the once over. Do not do all your thinking and investigating in front of given QEDs, merely assembling reasons to fill in between your theorem and what you want to prove will get you nowhere. Approach each subject with an open mind and, once sure that you have thought it out thoroughly and honestly, have the courage to abide by the decision of your own thought. But don't brag about it afterward. No book on public speaking will enable you to discourse on the tariff if you know nothing about the tariff. Knowing more about it than the other man will be your only hope for making the other man listen to you. Take a group of men discussing a governmental policy of which someone says, it is socialistic. That will commend the policy to Mr. A, who believes in socialism, but condemn it to Mr. B, who does not. It may be that neither had considered the policy beyond noticing that its surface color was socialistic. The chances are, furthermore, that neither Mr. A, nor Mr. B, has a definite idea of what socialism really is, for as Robert Louis Stevenson says, man lives not by bread alone but chiefly by catchwords. If you are of this group of men, and have observed this proposed government policy, and investigated it, and thought about it, what you have to say cannot fail to command their respect and approval, for you will have shown them that you possess a grasp of your subject and, to adopt an exceedingly expressive bit of slang, then some. Questions and exercises. 1. Robert Houdin trained his son to give one swift glance at a shop window in passing and be able to report accurately a surprising number of its contents. Try this several times on different windows and report the result. 2. What effect does reserve power have on an audience? 3. What are the best methods for acquiring reserve power? 4. What is the danger of too much reading? 5. Analyze some speech that you have read or heard and notice how much real information there is in it. Compare it with Dr. Hillis's speech on Brave Little Belgium, page 394. 6. Write out a 3-minute speech on any subject you choose. How much information, and what new ideas, does it contain? Compare your speech with the extract on page 191 from Drive Hillis's The Uses of Books and Reading. 7. Have you ever read a book on the practice of thinking? If so, give your impressions of its value. Note, there are a number of excellent books on the subject of thought and the management of thought. The following are recommended as being especially helpful: Thinking and Learning to Think, Nathan C. Schaefer, Talks to Students on the Art of Study, Kramer, As a Man Thinketh, Allen. 8. Define, A. Logic, B. Mental Philosophy, or Mental Science, C. Psychology, D. Abstract. Footnotes. 8. How to Attract and Hold an Audience, J. Berg Esenwein. 9. Use by Permission.